But I'm seeking a mandate for the people of Scotland in this referendum. I want people to back the proposition that we should share sterling in a currency union. That's sensible, a common sense common currency, best for Scotland, best for the rest of the UK. Now, that mandate is crucial. That's what I want people in Scotland to support, because I believe if we support it and send me into the negotiations as First Minister, then that will be the outcome. I've set out the options to point out there's other things that Scotland could do. I laid them out in some detail earlier on. But I go as First Minister to argue what's best for Scotland, seeking a mandate from the people of Scotland so as we can have that as the settlement in the negotiations. If I was to go in arguing for second best, then second best is what we would get. You go into negotiations with that mandate, arguing for what's best for Scotland, and that is keeping the pound sterling.
The point about a currency union is both parties have to agree to it. And yes, there is a sovereign will of the Scottish people, but also we have to accept there is a sovereign will of the rest of the UK. For a currency union to work, both sides have to agree. You see that in the Eurozone. And when you look at the views of throughout the whole country, the hostility to the Eurozone, just why you would expect people to say we don't want to join the Euro, but we'll join a currency union with what would then be a foreign country, you are taking a huge risk if you just assume it's all going to fall into place. I think a currency union would be bad for Scotland, because our budget would have to be decided and approved not by us, but by what would then be a foreign country, because that's what happens in the Eurozone. Every country has to send in its budget for approval, and it wouldn't be good for the rest of the UK either. But the question that was asked was, if we don't have a currency union, what's plan B? Now, I had no luck 3 weeks ago when I kept asking him what plan B is. He either can't say, or more likely, he doesn't think we're going to like the answer. It's not a matter for Alex Salmond what the alternative is. If it's the Panama model, If it's the Panama model, I'd like to know, because I don't want to be using somebody else's currency with no central bank, rotten public services. If it's the euro, I don't want that either. And as for a separate Scottish currency, we saw what happened when people get with a new currency, a new kid in the block. The first thing they've announced, they're going to default on debt. I want to know what plan B is. Well, so do you. Go and tell us.
Well, you don't have to point, Alistair. I set out the options very clearly. 3 plan Bs for the price of one. You're getting 3 plan Bs tonight, Alistair. They're just like buses, Alistair. You expect one, then 3 turn up in a row. You've got 3 plan Bs tonight.
OK, but hang on, now, isn't it the case? I'd like to follow up here.
If it is the sovereign will of the Scottish people, if people back that plan to keep sterling in a sensible currency union, will you, as a Democrat, accept that as the will of the Scottish people? If you win this referendum, I'll accept it's a no vote. If the yes side wins in the referendum, will you accept the sovereign will of the Scottish people and back a currency union?
I have always said that in a referendum you accept the outcome. But I happen to think, and so do a lot of people in this country, that a currency union of the sort you're proposing is a second best option for Scotland. I want the pound sterling, and the pound sterling only works if you have an economic and a political union that goes with it.
I want to follow up with both of you, and then I want to hear from members of our audience if you'd like to contribute some points. But it's not really the case that you haven't given us your plan B, because we can work it out, can't we? You've said no to the euro, you don't support that. The white paper says that if somebody wants to argue the case for a separate Scottish currency, they need to win an election. So that leaves us with, at the point of independence, if we can't have a currency union, using the pound anyway without formal agreement. Isn't that right?
You're absolutely right to point out we don't need permission to use our own currency. Nobody can tell us to do or not to use the pound. The argument actually is they'll deny us the assets of the Bank of England, the financial assets of the country. Now, the reason that won't happen, incidentally, is if you deny us the financial assets, then the UK, the rest of the UK, the people watching at home in England and Wales tonight, and Northern Ireland will get stuck with all of the liabilities. And there is absolutely no way, given the enormous, ginormous debts that Alistair Darling and George Osborne built up, that any UK Chancellor is wanting to let Scotland off with well, £5 billion a year of the debt payments that we've offered to make as part of a sensible currency union. That's why it's good for Scotland and good for the rest of the UK.
Alec, you said a few moments ago you had a row of buses, a row of Plan Bs and like buses that were all going to turn up at the same time. This is not a collection of buses. It's the money we use. It's the value of our savings, the interest rates we pay, the amount of money for public services. Stop playing games with us.
It's not Plan B. It's asking you
must have a Plan B.
Why the mandate of the Scottish people. If we win the referendum,
Alex,
will you be a Democrat?
Don't talk over one another, because then nobody can hear. Alistair Darling, can't we use the pound anyway?
Of course we can use the pound, we could use the ruble, we could use the dollar, we could use the yen, we can use anything we want. The problem is, if you're using somebody else's currency, you don't have a central bank, so our financial services can't exist in Scotland. The second thing that we just hold on a bit, right? The second problem you have is that countries that use other people's currencies, like Panama, like Ecuador, like Hong Kong, they have to run a surplus. They can't borrow. In other words, you'd have a huge deficit you'd have to plug. That comes out of public services like schools and hospitals. That's why it's such a nonsense option.
Alistair Darling, if the rest of the United Kingdom refuses a currency union, doesn't it leave itself liable for all the accumulated UK debt?
No, it doesn't. And come on, Glenn asked me a question. Then he'll come on to you, no doubt. If your first message in the new world is, here we are, here's Scotland, a new currency, and by the way, we've just defaulted on our debt, what do you think that would do to people who are lending us money in the future? Nobody would lend us any money in the future.
The Treasury accepted liability for all UK debt under all circumstances in January the 13th this year. You can't default on a debt that's not yours in the first place. But the key point we've heard tonight is Alistair a few seconds ago admitted we could use the pound anyway. We didn't need permission. Totally different from what the Chancellor of the Exchequer said only a few months ago when he says if you walk out of the UK, you walk out of the pound. We remember that. We've heard it tonight. They cannot stop us using the pound, the most important revelation of this debate this evening.
This is